Can you see my screen, Matt?
No.
Oh.
No worries, mate. I'll just get going. Okay. Tue ke runga, tue ke raro, tue ke waho, tue ke roto, tue ki te hele tangata, ka ronga te pau, ka ronga te ao, homie, huie, tai kia. All right, folks, welcome. Pleasure to have you here again for the third week of collective conversations. Obviously, it's good news with us moving to level 2 tomorrow. Highly anticipated, overly welcomed, but with that comes a real theme for today, which is primarily drawn from a bit of feedback, and that's getting a bit closer to return to play. And although guidelines may not quite be ready, Colin Stone will take us through what he can from a Sport NZ perspective. And just added in around Colin, I've got Glenn Quintal from Porirua City Council and Peter Clinton or Sarah Murray from Wellington City Council, just update on openings for their facilities. We'll then jump into a conversation with Blair Duncan, Operations Manager from Capital Football. Blair's going to share some of the learnings that have been applied from last year's return to play, as well as just some of the pressures that do exist and have been considered around moving back to play at this time for the sport of football. And then third, real pleasure to have Dane Lett joining us. Dane is fresh back from Tokyo, where he played the Olympics for the Black Sticks hockey team. Dane's also the head of hockey at Wellington Hockey, and he's going to talk to us about just his concepts and tips around resilience. And that theme really comes about from feedback as well. And we felt that it was good to go for something more practical as opposed to theoretical around resilience. And then rounding things off today will be just a bit of Q&A, perhaps across the panel. But we've also got a number of people on this call that I can see and I can bring you into the conversation. So if I can just ask that you share your questions. We really encourage participation on this one. Share your questions via the chat. And once we get through the speakers session, please use the raise a hand feature if you'd like to ask a question through the audio visual format as well. All right, Colin, we're ready to go, mate. So Sport NZ perspective, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Look, this update's going to be relatively generic, I'm afraid, and just to reiterate what I said frequently on these calls, once the government announced the change to alert levels, then we go into frantic mode working with the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet to try and clarify what that means for the sports sector. So those of you that would have been on the Sport New Zealand website having a look for our updates for the alert levels, they're not there yet, and that's because our policy team are still working with the policy team from the Prime Minister's office to get some clarity. So the update that I'll give you is relatively generic, and I'm conscious with the TA team on the call as well that they may be able to update you in a bit more detail around some of the indoor recreational facility stuff, but we see how we go. So look, in terms of parks and playgrounds at alert level 2, parks and playgrounds are open, and obviously families are allowed to sort of congregate around them for their children to play. People are allowed to drive to those facilities in the public places, and that can be a park or it can be a beach or wherever. The old adage, or the new adage really, I should say, really about keeping 2 meters apart still applies for if you're congregating with people that you don't know. And obviously the mantra around keeping hands sanitized and washed, particularly when you're sharing equipment or particularly when the kids are sharing play equipment, becomes really important. In terms of indoor recreation facilities at alert level 2, as you no doubt know, indoor sports facilities such as gyms and swimming pools, dance studios and health clubs can open, but there are extra safety measures in place. And as we reiterated at the last couple of these hui, this is not a playback to the alert level 2 as it was before. This is the alert level 2 on steroids, so to speak. So don't assume that what was happening at level 2 last time is the same for level 2 this time, which is why our team are frantically trying to get some clarity on some areas. So you'll need to keep 2 meters apart from others, and facilities may restrict the numbers to help with that sort of physical distancing approach. And as you'll be aware, as was the practice last time, owners are encouraged to make sure that they wipe down and clean their shared equipment before it's used again. The other comment I would make there is that at this stage, all customer-facing staff must legally wear the face covering while at work, except in swimming pools. And that's an area, I guess, we're still trying to clarify, because also personal trainers and coaches at gyms and indoor recreation facilities are encouraged to wear face masks as they also interact with a range of people. So there's a little bit of vagary there that we're just trying to clarify at the moment. And also there, all workers must keep 2 meters apart from customers and clients using their services. In terms of some of the areas I know you're really keen to know about, which is around team sports at alert level 2. As you know, team sports and team events can continue. These are limited to 50 people in indoor venues and 100 people in outdoor venues. And the 100-person limit includes players and spectators, but referees and officials and those that have had a responsibility to get the game on are not included in those 100 people. You do not have to wear face covering when participating in team sports. If a sports ground has more than one field, which many of them do, like Fraser Park, for example, you can play multiple games at the same time, as long as each group is separated and that the groups do not mix and mingle after the event or the activity, i.e. sharing common facilities like changing rooms. If you are an organizer of a sports event, and obviously many of the RSOs are on the call today, you have to make sure that records are kept of those people visiting, and that you're watching out at the event that there are 2 meters distance for those people who are watching or are spectators. So look, that's basically the broad update at the moment. I guess the point I wanted to make is that we are seeking at the moment early advice on whether mask wearing will be required for indoor sports, gyms and pools, as there still is a slight lack of clarity there. We're also trying to clarify at the moment restrictions around contact sports or those sports where physical distancing is not possible. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. I'm hoping that we'll have some clarity either by the end of the day or probably by tomorrow morning, and those guidelines will then go up onto the Sport New Zealand website. The question we often get asked, and it touches on the point that Matt made earlier on about questions. The question we get asked a lot is around funding. And as I may have mentioned last time, in fact, it was Jim that mentioned it last time, at the moment, there is no plan based on the intelligence we have to stand up another community resilience fund or similar. That's based on the intelligence that we're getting from the sector. If that intelligence changes, then we need to know. You will recall under the government support to the sector, Sport New Zealand received $264.5 million, which was to, I guess, create immediate support to the sector, but also to reposition the sector for the future. As of the moment, 200 million of that funding has been committed. So we're sitting on a pocket of around 60 million at the moment. Now this was for the next four years. So it is around trying to reposition the sector. But if the intelligence is telling us that the sector is starting to struggle or in future may struggle, then that that information is really valuable to us to make the decision about how we best utilize that money. It was not about propping up the sector. It was around repositioning the sector to be more sustainable in the long-term future. But please keep the questions coming and keep the intelligence coming, because it does help us to make some good decisions.
Colin,
Matt,
just on
back to you.
that info gathering, that intelligence gathering that you just spoke to, what form? How do you want that? Do you want that email? Do you want someone to ring up, or through Nukawara?
No. So there, yeah. So on the Sport New Zealand website, there is an email address for people to email straight into that the questions directly to us, or they can go through Nukawara, whichever is more convenient. Okay,
really, really good. And I think as now that we move sort of through 3 weeks of this increase in alert levels, organisations have shifted a little bit from, oh yeah, we're okay, to, oh yeah, hang on, actually this might play out next year. And so we're seeing a little bit of thought being given to the implications as they sort of get pushed into 2022 calendar year, which I think is something that you'll probably pick up on as part of feedback.
Yeah. Now that email address, by the way, which I now have to hand, is COVID-19 response@sportnz.org.nz.
Thanks for that, Colin. We'll put that into the chat. And now, Colin, I'm going to fire a couple of questions to you that have just come through the chat. You may not be able to answer them, but we'll use the feature. So Jess Collins is wondering, is customer facing including coaching? Is that necessary to wear a mask? I think you might have covered that, but can you just clarify that one?
Yeah, that's how I look at it. Again, it's scary for individuals to interpret the regulations as they're written at the moment, but that's certainly how it reads to me. But again, we can clarify that through the work that we're doing with the Prime Minister's office at the moment. I'll make a note of that one.
Yeah, great. Okay, Colin, Sarah Arnold's wondering about the 50-person limit indoors. Is there any differentiation on that between, say, facility staff, spectators, athletes, or is it just in total 50?
Indoors, it's just a total 50, and it's a venue that it is a space that can be separated from another space. Makes up the 50.
Okay. Yeah. Great. And did you actually confirm that whilst exercising indoors, it is not necessary to wear a mask?
That's the bit we're clarifying at the moment, because there seems to be some mixed conversations floating around, and I'm interested in what intel our TAs are picking up as well on that, because it'd be interesting to see whether they're getting mixed messages on that as well. That is one of the key questions that we're trying to clarify at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. And just scrolling down. David from College Sport, would players in a changing room need to wear a mask? I think we can say yes to that, can't we?
Preferable, but again, these things are not, and this is where the language is really important. It's preferable, I think, rather than mandated at this stage.
Okay.
Okay, so the whole conversation about mask wearing needs further clarity.
Yeah. Okay. Great, Colin. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Now we've just got Glenn Quintal from Porirua City Council. Glenn, do you just want to give us an update on your facilities, maybe just opening times, days, and just any other info with regards guidelines if you have it on hand?
Yeah, kia ora koutou. So Porirua facilities will commence operations again tomorrow morning, 5:30. So that's our pool and gym. So we will, I guess, have the standard protocols in place. Really, the point around face covering is an interesting one. So the dialogue that we're already having between our staff and members in our fitness centre, particularly, is in and around needing to wear a face covering to get to the gym, but not wear it whilst exercising. So these mixed messages around the application is something that we're still trying to work through as well. But yeah, 5:30 will commence our operations tomorrow. Key thing in the pool, so we've broken our facility down, Te Rauparaha Arena, down into zones. So we've got an event centre / stadia or 2 stadia where we're focusing on the number restrictions of 50. So we'll also have activities that take place in those areas. So we've got 2 defined spaces there. Our pool environment is another defined space where the guidance this time around isn't reliant on the number, but on the physical distancing of 2 meters. So we'll have increased protocols in around that, in addition to the hygiene management that we have. And then the group fitness and fitness centre, we'll be reducing our timetables, the distancing, so staggered equipment, traffic flow, queue management, and contact tracing will kind of be a key part of what we do in those environments. So we'll reduce our timetable in classes, but also reducing the class size and attendance to ensure that distancing is occurring as well. One of the interesting things that we've got to work through at the moment is group fitness instructors wearing a mask or not. So a participant may not have to wear a mask in terms of their exercising, but the group fitness instructor who is taking part and participating in that under the current guidance is suggested that they should be wearing a face covering. So we're more applying the physical distancing there as opposed to face coverings, but that's a provision that is there should be taken up. Learn to swim is an interesting one. It doesn't really fit into any protocol, whether it be a sporting sense where you've got a team participation bubble, and it doesn't really fit into the indoor recreational facilities, i.e. pool, in terms of distancing of 2 meters per people that aren't friends or family. So that's an interesting one that we're still grappling with. So we're going to bring that online next week once we flesh some things out a little bit more and get some more robust guidance from our industry partners. So that's probably the operation as it stands. There will be shifts in how we communicate with our customers. So definitely more awareness around contact tracing and what do we do with that information. Previous level 2s, we've been identifying the need to contact trace, but with it becoming, the languaging becoming more mandatory, there's probably a need to enhance our privacy statements around what we will be using this information for. So we'll be doing that, encouraging mask wearing or face covering through facilities as they transit. Yeah, that's probably the key parts to our operation as it stands at the moment. It's been a whirlwind within 24 hours, but I think we're largely there in terms of what we're going to operate. There's just some refined activities to be undertaken.
Yeah, Glenn, great. Really calm voice, but clearly you're making it up as you go. Well done. Nice work. And I mean that really politely. Peter, what about Wellington City Council? Fairly similar, but how about opening days and times?
Kia ora, Matt, and everyone else. Thanks very much. I think we've got Matt Bialy on the call, so it's going to be very similar advice, I think, to Glenn's in terms of what's opening and when. Matt, I saw your name there. Please feel free to jump in.
Yep, no, I'm here. So Matt Bialy, Recreation Facilities Manager, Wellington City Council. We're not opening any facilities tomorrow. The facilities rec centres will be opening from Thursday morning. From a pool perspective, Freiburg, Karori and Tawa will open on Thursday, normal hours. Keith Spry and RAC, the main pool at RAC, they are still having the construction works completed. So RAC main pool is looking to open on the 18th of September and Keith Spry is opening on the 20th of September. The hydrotherapy pool at RAC will be open from Thursday though. So that's our opening times. I suppose the mask question for us has probably got thrown up a little bit up in the air today with, I'm not sure if anyone saw, but Jacinda did get asked the question through interview time and came back and said, no, don't need any masks in pools because of the moist atmosphere. So that's something that we're having to rework through as a group, and where it makes it a little bit harder as well as where we've got Freiburg, where our gym is actually in the pool deck area, so that's going to throw some questions up for us. We're using the Exercise New Zealand guidelines around gym masks, So masks must be worn by personal trainers, gym floor staff, and admin in all circumstances when serving customers. But staff who are physically exercising, e.g. group exercise, instructors are not required to wear a mask but maintain a 2-metre physical distancing. So I suppose that, again, while there's a whole lot that Colin was going to come back and give us some answers, that might come back to the coaching one as well. And that's the one that we're taking with our people who are teaching in the classes, our group recreation classes to students as well. We're saying if they are actually physically exercising, they need to wear a mask, but if they are able to do instruction, coaching, where they're less active, then they will be wearing a mask. The biggest question for us is probably around the ASB Sports Centre and around the limits that that we have in that space. So it's interesting to hear you, Colin, sort of say that if we can separate the spaces, then you can do 50. In the past, what we have done is we have separated those 12 courts into 6 different sections, and we've sort of used that as the 100 limit. Under this guideline, we'd probably do that down to the 50, but still waiting to hear back the guidance that comes out from Sport New Zealand. Those are probably the main things in our pools and rec centres.
Great, thank you. And I can just speak to an email I read from Hutt City Council that has council facilities opening at 10 o'clock tomorrow, but swimming pools 12 noon on Thursday. Okay, everyone. I see David just commented in the morning from ASB. He's already sent some information out. So we'll try and collate all of that and pull it together on our website for following this. We'll also have another Q&A part to the session near the end. So we'll move on to next speaker, Blair Duncan, Operations Manager, Capital Football. Just talking us through the Capital Football approach to return to play and you know what you guys have learned, but some of the pressures around that. Blair, your opportunity, mate.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks everybody for having me. I will share my screen, hopefully. Oh, sorry. A sneak preview for everyone there if you were quick enough to pay attention. But yeah, we'll just talk through the experiences that we learned last year and how we have applied some of those to this year. Just a bit of a recap, and it was quite interesting going back sort of through memory lane around what happened. It feels like so long ago, March to May last year, but obviously that was when we went through that level 3 and 4 lockdown, which coincided with the start sort of and then through to sort of mid-season for us. Coming into level 2 in May and June. So that was the sort of would have been mid-season, but turned into the new start date of 8 June and 6 June, and I'll go through that a little bit more detail shortly. August, September, there was a little blip, which is sort of around the end of the season. And then this year we've had a little re-entry in February, March in level 2, which was pre-season. The wee little outbreak in June, which was obviously mid-season. Now we've had this lockdown, which has coincided with the end of our season. So you'll see sort of throughout those different dates and the period they were in our season, it's sort of covered all the way through from pre-season, mid-season, start of the season, and now we're seeing something through to the end of the season. So what we did during lockdown last year, we worked with the with other regional sporting organisations, with Sport Wellington and obviously the various councils around start dates and transitions from winter to summer sport. Councils were fantastic here, and so obviously the summer sports in enabling us to get a season. So we lost a couple of months at the start of the year, but we managed to gain 1 to 1.5 at the end of the year, which really meant that we could complete somewhat of a season. Given that we'd already taken some registrations, but the season hadn't started, we offered full refunds for any teams that didn't want to partake. What was really important to us is to try and be quick and nimble around decision making, particularly, you know, as everybody will know how it came out and when it came out, and some of the challenges that Colin was alluded to around, you know, guidance and it changing and getting updated all the time. So we used our advisory groups that we had already through our club advisory groups, and then we set up some more just to make sure that when we needed to make decisions, we could make them quickly with consultation with our clubs as well. We rescheduled our competitions. So in a lot of cases, we reduced the number of teams per league. This just meant we had a little bit more flexibility to be able to get through 2 full rounds or get through 1 round if COVID was to come back again. And what we did there is, depending on how much of the season they would have got played, we offered credits back to clubs. I think one of the keys for us, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the learnings, was the financial forecasting, the reforecasting and the re-reforecasting around scenarios 1 to 100, but it possibly could have been more. So it was, all the things you can imagine around the different start dates, the different restrictions at different start dates, any restrictions to the amount of games and teams and competitions that we can have on any one day, and all those sorts of things. So it was, I guess, trying to come up with as many different scenarios as we can, and then working out the forecast for those to see where we'd sit financially, and what impacts it would all have. And the next thing was just around communication. So obviously we communicated to our clubs and our stakeholders around what was happening at each alert level. What we tried to do was we tried to communicate as quickly as we could, even if it was just to say more information was coming at X date, just to keep everyone as aware as they could be. What we did when we were returning to play at level 2 last season, so this is obviously after the big lockdown, but some of the points here are relevant for the smaller level 2 changes that we went through as well. So obviously we collaborated with New Zealand Football around return to play and what that looked like specifically for football, but also for Wellington and the wider region, as we've got some unique challenges and unique opportunities in this space. Created obviously a web page and put it all through our social channels as well. We worked with the various councils, and like I say, they did a fantastic job. I know some of them are on the call here today, so thank you for all your work just around the restrictions and the guidelines. So things like health and safety plans, signage, tracing, hygiene, use of changing rooms, and all those sorts of things. And now, as everybody will be aware, there was a number of those that we had to contend with, and it seems as if this year there's that plus, or those on a little bit more, whether it is as requirements rather than recommendations from last year. A lot of the junior and the youth stuff, and a couple of people have already mentioned around the number of gatherings that we could have. What we decided to do was to adjust some of the formats of our larger festivals that we had, where we had a lot of people gathering. So whether that was a lot of, a few more smaller ones as opposed to one really big one. We tried to stagger kickoff times, restricted spectators, and all that sort of stuff, just so we could keep to the 100-person gathering, particularly at the large grounds like Karori and Fraser and Mazingarb and the like. Obviously, we work with clubs around their responsibilities, including operating the changing room the club room safely. And again, communicating was key for us. What we learned, there's a lot of great people working in sport. 2020 was a trying year, but I think everybody supported everybody else in it, and it went really well. As always, went as well as it could be expected, given some of the challenges that we faced. The key points for us, though, as I've touched on earlier, were communication. So that's to staff, to board, to clubs and club members, to New Zealand Football and other federations as well, but also to the local councils and other RSOs and Sport Wellington, just so everybody knew what was happening. And I think one of the great things that came out of last year is that, where possible, we tried for a consistent approach throughout the region. And which is obviously difficult, given that we've all got to have consistent approaches up through our organisations and across to other areas, for example NZF and other federations for us. We did a lot of scenario planning, so we had scenarios based on dates, impacts, restrictions, and competition formats, etc. And then, like I say, financial forecasting. So every scenario was costed, including potential impacts on staffing and some of those really challenging bits. So this time around, we're almost there. We had half of our comps had finished, and the rest have about 1 to 2 weeks left. So fingers crossed we can get them back underway this weekend and then the next couple of weekends, but we'll see what that guidance looks like from Sport New Zealand. So we finished all our junior comps and youth comps early. These were scheduled to the end of August, just based on sort of ground availability and a number of other factors. So we decided not to try and push those out any further, and especially given balance is better and a lot of those seasonal transition measures that we're all agreeing to at the moment, we thought it was prudent to finish that junior and youth season. We worked with various councils and ground owners around the availability of grounds for the remaining senior fixtures. Given we completed most of the season, I think council's focus understandably was on the transition to summer. So therefore we didn't have access to many of the grass fields. Luckily for us, though, we've got a number of artificials, so we've looked to book those, as many of those in as we can, and then be as reactive as we can when we can confirm what the season will finish like. Obviously, we consulted with our clubs around whether they wanted to or didn't want to finish the season, and the majority were keen to get out and play. We went hard and we went early on potential scenarios in our comms, maybe a little bit early for some people. We also worked collaboratively with NZF around scheduling, particularly around the national leagues and the Kate Shepherd and Chatham Cups, which obviously involve Auckland teams, which makes that a little bit more complicated than our regional competitions. Another thing we also did was we triaged the remaining games and planned for multiple different return to play dates and reforecast. So just got a couple of, I suppose, examples of some of the things that we did. We a number of different calendars, so this was just one of them that we put up. So it just plots the season and all the different leagues in the season. The red areas are obviously the stuff that was pushed back through COVID, and the green sort of where we're hoping to be able to return to play. So that's got the relevant dates there. So this just offered us a little bit of a visual, and we put this sort of thing up on our website as well, just so clubs can see that. And this is when I was talking about triaging before. So basically ran a report of all of the games that we had left, identified which grounds we may not be able to get in yellow there. Anything was highlighted around the new dates and times. And the other thing we did is we just sort of went through and ranked the importance of each of the competitions and then the importance of each game. So if the season was pretty much all tied up, as it has been in the Central League, for example, then that's not really required. But obviously still an important competition, so we want to go through it. So we just went through and triaged all the games there, so we knew what we had left and what. But that's basically it from me as a bit of an overview. Were there any, I guess, any questions from anyone?
Blair, I'll just start off a couple of questions. Just what do you think some of the biggest challenges are for you just operating in maybe not this environment right now during lockdown, but normal, when you've got this hanging over you as to what the scenarios might be?
Yeah, I guess the tricky thing is, like you said, it's the uncertainty. So you don't know what the scenarios are. I think what we tried to do was we tried to basically kind of do a bit of an 80%. So we didn't go 100% into every different scenario. We just had 100 different scenarios and tried to go sort of 80% across them. So we roughly knew what was going to happen. But as soon as one was identified, and and like we saw last year, it was pretty, we went to level 2, and I don't think anybody was really expecting to be able to play sport. But then the guidance came out that we could. So bang, we just, went to the earliest possible date that we could, given that, there was a lot of financial pressures around at that time and making all of it work. But I suppose on the flip side of that is that there's always a lot of things that you need to adhere to. Sport, and particularly outdoor sport, can be a little bit tricky where there's councils that own the grounds, we hire them, but it's the clubs that go out and play there and the teams. So there's all of those different layers that you need to take into consideration when you're sending out the messaging and trying to get, what I think we sort of have maybe between 700 and 1,000 games every weekend when it's a full junior, youth and senior calendar. So making sure there's 100% adherence is obviously pretty difficult. So the messaging therefore needs to be pretty strong.
Yeah, good. And just one last question, Blair. What would you say has been the most helpful tool or resource that you've had on hand or available through this little adaptation and return to play period?
I think the best thing for us is obviously Zoom and Teams and the like. Just being able to talk with people and share information as quickly as possible. I think those sorts of things have been really good. Obviously, everybody's the websites and the information that comes out from Sport New Zealand and Nuka-Ora and the councils, everything's updated regularly. It's all up on the website. Everybody knows as much information pretty much as early as possible. So those, I suppose, being able to access the information is the most valuable, and then communicate with those people that are key to getting plans underway.
Nice one, Blair. Hey, thank you very much. And if anyone has questions for Blair, just drop them in the chat. We'll hold off till the end of this session. Blair, just draw your attention to Liz has asked a question down the chat, which you're probably going to give same sort of attention as what Colin did, but can you just have a look at that for me? And
yeah, the changing rooms, for us, it's dictated by councils and by ground owners. So whatever they say goes. That's sort of what we communicate. Coming into level 2 at the start last year, I think it was a little bit touch and go. Councils could only commit to cleaning them one time, obviously at the end of every day. They couldn't do it after every game. So where possible, we can restrict the use of changing rooms. We can, I think, put the onus a little bit on clubs to clean them out and to disinfect them after each team uses them, which is obviously quite a big resource for them to do. But if they're happy to do it, then I think that's something we need to explore. So yeah, for us, it's Liz, it's just really around what those ground owners sort of mandate that we need to do for changing rooms.
yeah, thanks, Blair. And Sarah Beeman, Sarah, I know your question down there, and I think we might try and come back to that one at the end, because sports have had different approaches depending on their pressures. So I'd just like to move on to Dane's little session now, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. Thanks, Blair.
No worries. Thanks all.
All right. Yeah, pleasure to introduce Dane Lett now. Dane's a NZ Black Sticks, a hockey Olympian. And I suppose one of the interesting perspectives that he brings is obviously a recent Olympian and everything that was involved in going to the Olympics under extremely different circumstances to what a normal Olympics might look like. But we have heard and read of the, say, post-Olympic blues. But Dane went straight into MIQ, obviously, when getting back home, and with that was also straight back into his job as a manager in RSO. So for a really interesting perspective on Dane's view on resilience, my pleasure to pass it over to you, Dane.
Kia ora, Matt. Thanks for having me on the call. Yeah, look, first of all, I'll say just quickly, I'm definitely not an expert on this topic of resilience. It's a bit of a loose subject that gets thrown around a little bit. What I know is things that have worked for me in all of kind of my areas of life, whether that's sport or work or family. And what I know is that through kind of a few different approaches that I've had, I've been able to get the most out of myself. And it's allowed me to kind of balance across my life. So I guess that one of the first things is around my career in sport. I hear a lot of people talk around the sporting career, especially high performance, as a bit of a roller coaster. And I always feel like people talk about it through a bit of a negative lens, that, you know, there's a lot of ups and downs and it's stop and it's start. And I feel like they really ride the emotion of that roller coaster. So it just takes them a whole lot of places and they're never quite sure where they're going. I try to look at that roller coaster ride as a positive, and I sort of lean in and embrace that ride. I think roller coasters in general are enjoyable things to jump on. So, and I think particularly my roller coaster, I probably spent a long time lining up to get on the ride. There's probably a good 10, 12 years that I lined up training, working my butt off to try and get on the ride. So I always find it you know, my take is that when I'm on it, I want to enjoy it. Because I know at some point the ride will end, and either I'll jump off because I decide to, or someone's going to kick me off because they decide to, and that this ride is not one that I'll be able to line up for again. So it's done. So my take is that the sport and high performance career is definitely a roller coaster, but I think that it's an enjoyable ride to be on. And much like people, you know, with your jobs, no doubt you'll be people on this call that are in really good jobs that they've wanted for a long time, and they've climbed the ladder and studied and everything. And once you get to that point and you're on the roller coaster that you want to be on, I think for me it's about enjoying that and flowing with those ups and those downs and the starts and the stops, and just trying to stay really even across that. I try not to let emotion flow with the roller coaster. I try to stay nice and consistent in my approach to it. And there's probably a couple of main, I guess, approaches that I have to sport. One of them is one you hear all the time, is around controlling the controllable things. And I know that that's probably mental skills 101 that people hear in and around teams, but for me that's really important. It's about not attaching emotion to outcomes that I can't control. Like the Olympics is a really good example. We didn't get the result that we wanted. We came agonizingly short of proceeding onto the into the stages that we wanted to. But I always measure myself against my preparation because I know that that's a space that I can completely own. So I always asking myself before I go sort of the key questions, and that allows me to almost sort of preempt what if I fail, or what if we don't do what we want to do, because I never want that feeling afterwards of asking those questions. Could I have done more? Should I have been better? So I'm always trying to ask those questions through my preparation. And if I can answer those and tick all those boxes before I get to the event, then whatever happens at the event, I'm comfortable with, because I know for playing for so long, like some days you're on and some days it just doesn't go your way. And as long as my preparation is exactly what I want it to be, and I know that I've ticked all the right boxes, I'm really comfortable with the fact that it might not go my way on the day. And that doesn't mean that I don't care about the result. Like, winning's important for sure, but it's that I'm comfortable that I'll be okay, and that there'll be another time. So it's kind of one of my biggest things is just asking the right questions. Am I proud of my preparation? Am I comfortable with what I've done, and is it enough? And if I can answer all of those, then I'm always okay with the outcome, whether that's a win or a loss, or I play great, or I have a bit of a bad day. I'm always comfortable with that outcome because I know I've done what I could to put myself in a position to play well. But the other thing probably attached to that is just around trying to maintain perspective. That's kind of been my biggest lesson through sport and life. And I've kind of had both ends of the spectrum, I guess. When I first started in my international career, I really probably lacked perspective, and it cost me massively in terms of my international career and where I didn't go. And then I went away from kind of hockey, and I had a family, and those parents on the call will know how much that opens your eyes to the wide world, and how much things that you used to think were really important become all of a sudden really small and insignificant in your eyes. So I've sort of taken the lessons of that into sport. And I asked the right questions around, if I play bad, do I still have my health? Do I have my family? At a core, am I still the same person? If I answer all yes to all those things, it's never a situation I'm going to be nervous about. Whether it's a Commonwealth Games final, I'm really relaxed and at ease, because I know that no matter what happens, I'll still have my health, still have my family, and I'm still going to be the same person at my core. So as long as those things are always there, it's not a position or a situation I'm ever going to be nervous or concerned about. And that's been my approach to sport, and that's probably allowed me to just play with a little more freedom and be really calm and composed in myself. And it allowed me to give me really good optimism around tough times and adversity. Like our last Olympic prep, like Matt said, the whole COVID situation threw a lot of spanners in the works. Like all of last year, I was getting 1,000 questions every time someone saw me. Is the Olympics going ahead? What do you think? Should it go on? And they probably thought I wasn't really interested in going to the Olympics, because every time I just said, I've got no idea. Because I really didn't give that any attention. If it's not something I could control, I'm not in the IOC, and I don't control, those big decisions, unfortunately. So I really didn't give it any attention at all. All I did was train as if it was going ahead. And if at some point someone's going to say, you're on the plane and you're in, or they'd say it's cancelled, or you're not in. And all I could do was control my training, and I couldn't allow any energy or effort to be wasted on those other things that didn't concern me. And just in this last Olympic preparation as well, we had a lot of, I guess, adversity. We about 3 weeks out from the Tokyo Games, we went to Perth. Perth hadn't had a COVID case in about 6 months. While we're in Perth, they got a COVID case that came from Sydney, and then all of a sudden we were held, and we couldn't come home for 2 weeks. So that kind of threw a real spanner in the works. And obviously you want to come home because your family's there, and you're supposed to be at home, and you know that you've got an Olympic campaign that's just around the corner, and you're going to be away for a long time. But again, those are things I couldn't control. I didn't bring in the COVID. I was doing all that I could, so I didn't try and let it get me down or get frustrated about it. Once we did get home, we got a 5-day turnaround before we had to leave for the Olympics, which was going to be a 3-week trip. once we finished the Olympics, we finished our event. Unfortunately, it didn't go well, so we didn't make it out of pool play. And we all thought that we were leaving on a plane the next day. And then there was a bit of a mix-up with MIQ, and we didn't. And they said that we couldn't leave for another week. So all of a sudden, we just got kicked out of the Olympics. It's the ultimate kind of low in terms of a result. And now we have to stick around and basically lock down in Tokyo for another week before we can leave to get into MIQ. So you end up having about a 3-week period after the disappointment of the Olympics where you're stuck in lockdown, and all you want to do is get home. So these are sort of things that just get thrown at you consistently as an athlete, and it's just about managing those around, again, trying to stay optimistic. Still had my health, still had my family, I was still the same person, and again, I couldn't control those. So I wasn't in the decision-making process with the government around why we need to go to MIQ or not. I just knew that that's something we had to do, so I had to live with it. So it's just about rolling with those punches, and that's kind of been my take. I guess working in sport, I've tried to apply a lot of those same principles. I always find sport to be a really unique and interesting environment to work in. It's different to a lot of working environments in that our community is our customers, and there's a lot of quotation marks experts in our customer base. So we're constantly opening ourselves up because it is collaborative, which it should be. We're constantly opening ourselves up for opinions and very direct feedback from what we should do or what we shouldn't do. I always think I wouldn't take my car to the mechanic and suggest how he should check my engine and then maybe give him a bit of a critique on what he did or didn't do in his methods of mechanics. I just let him do what he's doing because he's the expert. Sports is a little bit different like that. We have a lot of passionate people, so working around different people, working with coaches, I do see a lot of people ride that roller coaster, and I see a lot of people ride the ups and the downs and find it really, really difficult. And if you're gonna allow your emotions to be attached to those ups and those downs, all of a sudden you have a bad season as a coach. It becomes a really bad year for you personally. I always try to navigate people so that we can just keep perspective around those things and stay optimistic, be really clear on what's important to them as a person, and try and stay clear on what's important and what the sport is and what it isn't. And for sure at work there's always people that want to tell us what we should be and shouldn't be doing and critique us on our own work, but I just try and take out the personal aspect of that. Again, perspective that most of these people don't actually know me as a person. They're not in my family, so they don't know me at an intimate level. So it's never an attack or a criticism on me as a person. It's of something, a piece of work or whatever that is. So try to take out the personal aspects of those, and then again allows me to not get emotional in that and just take it for what it is. But yeah, I mean, these are kind of just some of the tools that I've tried to use in life, and these are just things that I know have worked for me through trial and error. Like my biggest lessons have definitely had to be learnt the hardest way. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if someone gave you a book and said, here you go, don't try not to fall and you can just run straight away. But I've definitely had to go the other way on some things, but I guess it's just trying to use those failures as fertilizers, so you grow from them and you get better and better. And now I've sort of, especially in hockey, got myself into a space where I've been able to be really consistent across a long period now, once I've ironed all those sort of mental processes out, I guess. But yeah, that's probably a few things that have just stuck with me around my approach and what I've got to and what works for me.
Tane, thanks for that. It's quite a unique perspective. I think there's a lot of things I could try and scratch around on, ask some questions about, but I've just got one, and I wonder, what's your approach when you see others under pressure, and maybe in your team, maybe at work close to you? What sort of role do you play then?
Yeah, I try to guide them towards some of those concepts and some of those principles of thinking, just to heighten that perspective a little bit. So just to bring some of their thinking out of that situation, because I always find when people are in something, it becomes more important and it's bigger than what they think it is. And as soon as they step out of that, and they can kind of remove themselves from the situation and think a little bit wider and clearer, they can tend to think a little bit smarter. So I've dealt with, I don't know how many coaches that have been at crisis point in their season, and you know, it's very doom and gloom, and it's just about trying to heighten that perspective and just asking the right questions of themselves, and you know what's really important to them, and what makes them tick. And once you get to know them, you form those close relationships, allows those processes to happen quite easily. So that's normally something I'm always trying to work towards getting.
Nice one. Thanks, Dane. Just going to use the rest of the time. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left in this session to go for a bit of Q&A, and so it's kind of open mic really. I'll just ask you to use the raise a hand function if you want to ask a question via the audio visual, or if you want to drop something in the chat. But Phil Gibbons is, I think you've got a question, so I'll just pass it over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks to the panelists today too. It's been another bloody great session. Back to you, Colin. So you talked to us around how we might seek information from Sport NZ, but what I'm interested in knowing is what information are Sport NZ looking for from the regions, and in particular our region, to aid your planning and decision making?
Thanks, Phil. It's probably not necessarily about the Wellington region per se. It's more around the trends. So if we're getting like-minded conversations that are bubbling up from across the country where there are similar situations. So, for example, the intelligence seems to suggest at the moment that community sport is not as challenged as it was, you know, March, April of last year. So that has driven us to the decisions at the moment that we don't need to stand up a community resilience fund, and clearly we're now starting to move down the alert levels. If the intelligence across the country suggests that that may be the case now, but through their scenario planning, organisations are predicting that in 6 months' time they may be challenged through cash flow situations because they haven't got the income coming in that they thought, then that's a decision that will help us, or that's information that will help us plot a trend that may change the direction of some of our decision making. So it's not so much about the Greater Wellington region, it's more around the trends that enable us to make good decisions.
Thanks, Colin. Doesn't look like there's any questions from out there just yet. Phil, you got another question, or do you want me to take it back?
No, I guess it's an observation following on from Colin's commentary to my question. If there are organisations out there that have information that if we're able to collect and collate it and present it in such a way that it gives Sport NZ, I think probably some more current ground truth around what's happening out in the region, then I make the offer to let us know. Happy to represent that and take it back in, whatever the topic may be, and it might not just be funding.
Yeah, that will be helpful, Phil. It's a good role for the RST to play as well, I think, to cultivate that information.
And Phil, I might just direct a question your way. Given you've been in contact with a lot of RSOs and other organisations through the last few weeks, and certainly with years of experience as CE of Nukuora Sport Wellington previously, are you noticing anything now bubbling up that concerns you about the future of sport and recreation?
Yeah, to me, there's two things. I think this time round, in the positive sense, I see far more collaboration and work going on across organisations rather than just a deep attention into your own respective organisations. And everybody on the call today plays a role in that. So that's kind of the big tick for me, is that very early on in this lockdown period, there's real evidence of that collaboration going on, people sharing lessons, people talking to each other, people looking for solutions amongst those who might have found one. But I think the reality of it all at the moment is, I reckon there's some long-term effects that we don't know enough about right now. And I think as we push stuff out, we're going to start to find that in those communities we're struggling to reach now anyway, and improve that kind of participation level, it's going to get even harder. I think those barriers, whilst they might not be new barriers, the barriers are going to become slightly bigger. The affordability of being able to participate and organise sport inside a community and inside a region, how affordable is that going to be in the future? So that kind of scares me a bit, Matt, and I think we need to be having some conversations around that. The team on the call, you get evidence of it all the time, doing bloody good with the here and now, but what's next year, what's the year after and the year after effects going to be? And that does scare me a little bit.
Just to pick up on that from our perspective, and thanks for that, Phil, and people may be aware of this, but definitely COVID has heightened the difference, I guess, between those with barriers to participate and those who have less barriers to participate. So particularly around deprivation, that is COVID has heightened the opportunity for people from more deprived areas to participate in sport and active recreation. So that is definitely a live conversation. The other comment I would make, and it was go back to the comment I made earlier on with the investment we got from government, the 265 million. Part of that was around saving the sector for the here and now, but it was also around future-proofing the sector and how can we change the system that really, in many ways, has been around for 100 years to be future-proofed for the next 100 years. This is our moment in time to be able to do that. So those conversations through the futures work and what that may lead to may change the way play, active recreation, and in particular sport is delivered into the future.
Really good, Colin. And on that note, that gives us a bit of a steer to next week. So just to wrap up, it's obviously thanks to you, Colin, Blair, and Dane for your contribution today. Really appreciate the perspective that all of you have brought, both practical and a little bit of theory there, but certainly the practical perspective is one for which is really helpful in this return to play sequence. Next week, we've got Raylene Castle, CE of Sport NZ, and Andrew Leslie, CE of Recreation Aotearoa, joining us, and we'll add to that group as we really look towards the future of sport and continuing the conversation that just kicked into at the end there. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to the speakers. Everything will be up on the website for you to view later or questions answered. Enjoy the rest of your level 3 experience and go well into level 2 tomorrow. See everybody. Thank you.
You're right. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Matt. Well done.